Every culture is unique within its own country, and that culture is what shapes the population's beliefs, values, managerial practices, as well as organizational development. The country's culture that we will be examining today is Japan. We will see how its culture has shaped the society's ideals and how their perspectives have developed in the general sense and in the workplace. Gert Hofstede is a Dutch professor and researcher currently residing in the Netherlands. He is known for his studies on organizational culture in addition to the cross-cultural research he has conducted and published. One of his most renowned theories is the cultural dimensions theory, which is a framework describing 5 cultural dimensions which are used to assess differing beliefs and perspectives between people with different culture and how they relate to behavior. The 5 cultural dimensions researched by Gert are power distance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, and long-term versus short-term orientation. The first cultural dimension we will be looking at is its power distance. Power distance is the degree of inequality amongst members of society that people within a country deem acceptable. In other words, it is the unequal distribution of power that the people living in Japan tolerate and accept in any setting, whether it is within a family, in the workplace, school, or in society in general. Japan's power distance score is 54, showing that Japan's society is somewhat hierarchical and that power and status hold more importance in some areas of the country than in others. People in Japan treat their elders with great respect and grant them with high authority. This is seen throughout the country's companies and firms, since those in top management positions are a lot older than those in the lower positions. No one our age, in their teens or 20s, would ever be considered for a top management position. While the Japanese place much power on one person, it is not this person at the top who makes decisions on their own. The Japanese people take a consensus of all the people involved. On an educational level, we also see why Japan's power distance is not extremely high. This is because the Japanese people believe everyone is born equally with the same power to succeed and accomplish goals. Individualism is a degree of interdependence a society maintains amongst its members. Japan scored a 46 on the dimension of individualism, which places Japan in about the middle between individualism and collectivism. While Japan is slightly more collectivistic than individualistic, they are far less collectivistic than most Asian countries, including China and Korea. Japanese are much more private and reserved than their Asian neighbors. Collective problem solving and working in groups is very common in Japanese organizations. Their communication style is more indirect because they are reluctant to affect group harmony. Loyalty to the group is critical for success. In fact, company loyalty is extremely important to the Japanese. One often stays at the same company for their entire career. In regards to company loyalty, this characteristic is debatable in terms of individualism because it is considered individualistic by Asian standards and collectivistic by Western standards. Japan ranks at the most masculine society in the world, with a score of 95 on the masculinity dimension. Japanese culture is extremely competitive, particularly on a group level. Most masculine societies are competitive on an individual level. Japanese competitiveness displays its collectivistic dimension. Striving for excellence is at the core of Japanese values and is often fostered from a very young age. Individuals carry these values with them into the workforce. In addition, Japanese extreme masculinity can be characterized by an emphasis on assertiveness, honor, success, absolute sexual separation, sacrifice, insensitivity, achievement, and perfectionism. Japanese workers tend to be workaholics. They work extremely long hours and often on weekends and holidays as well. Training and development is very important in masculine organizations to prevent making mistakes. Japanese employees often go through extensive and harsh training programs. Sexist attitudes in the workforce and the requirement of working long business hours has made it difficult for women to obtain jobs and to attain high positions. When they are hired, women often make much less than their male counterparts. Working long business hours is difficult for most women because they are also expected to care for their children and take care of the household. The fourth dimension is uncertainty avoidance, which deals with how members of a culture respond to things they are not accustomed to. Having an uncertainty avoidance of 92 shows how Japan's culture has made its citizens so speculative toward uncertain and ambiguous situations. Japan's high level uncertainty avoidance has been attributed to its geographic location because it is subject to many unpredictable natural disasters. This has helped the Japanese to learn to adapt and prepare for anything that comes their way. Not only in emergency cases, but in general, the Japanese like to know what's coming and how to approach it in order to do their best and be the best, which is what their culture emphasizes. Uncertainty avoidance also involves little change and surprises, which is why the Japanese rituals, ceremonies, and weddings are performed exactly the same every time. This is because everything remains constant in Japan. This is also seen in their corporate setting, where the Japanese do not like taking risks, but rather make the appropriate calculations and research beforehand to determine the exact results and to avoid any disruption or uncertainty. Hofstede's final cultural dimension is long-term and short-term orientation. Long-term meaning goal-oriented, and short-term is going with things as they come. In this dimension, Japan has a score of 80, showing how it is long-term oriented. This correlates to Japan's masculinity and its aspiration to perform and be the best. Also, at a very young age, children are to put their focus on goals that will allow them to succeed. Fun and the freedoms attached to it are also given no importance. The Japanese believe in continual production and hate wasting time, which is why they are such workaholics, because they believe every minute should be spent on something productive and that will enhance their knowledge to become better, successful people. Richard Gesteland did research on the dimensions of business behaviors to help describe the difference in cross-cultural business behaviors and decisions. He realized that behaviors are unique to their country and that changes in behavior are due to different beliefs and cultures. These dimensions are deal focused versus relationship focused, informal versus informal, rigid time monochromic versus fluid time polychromic, expressive versus reserved cultures, communication style, which involves low or high context, and whether the communication is informal or formal. Being deal focused involves risk takers and paying no attention to previous relationships, trust, or loyalty. Japan is the complete opposite. It is relationship focused. Japan refuses to make deals with people who are strangers, so it maintains its relationships with whom it does business with. And they have already maintained their trust from previous experiences. This ties to Hofstede's dimension of uncertainty avoidance, because the Japanese do not like to place themselves in situations in which the results are not guaranteed. Also, the Japanese loyalty to their company shows how they try to maintain the relationships they already have. The Japanese people also do not like confrontation. In regards to whether Japan is informal or formal, it is more formal since hierarchy and respect play a vital role in the Japanese culture in many matters, such as family and business. This ties to how the Japanese people do not like confrontation and instead respect one another by not making any criticizing remarks against one another, since those remarks may come off as disrespectful. The Japanese are also extremely polite and believe in proper etiquette at all times. For example, the Japanese do not complain and are not emotional people. They accept their personal responsibility for an event, even if they're not the primary entity at fault. A common phrase you'll hear in Japan is shaganai, meaning it can't be helped. For example, is there a long line? Shaganai. The Japanese, as mentioned briefly before, put others before themselves, which is why it is very important while in Japan to consider how it will affect those around you. Another dimension by Gesteland is rigid time monochromic versus fluid time polychromic. Japan's long-term oriented nature shows that time plays a significant part in Japanese culture. Along with time, structure and respect are also very important factors, which is why the Japanese culture carries monochromic traits than polychromic traits. The Japanese believe in punctuality and certainty, and As we have seen in Hofstede's mention of uncertainty avoidance, they do not like to fall into uncertain situations. These characteristics make up a monochromatic culture, one that has a strict regard for time limits, schedules, structure, and deadlines, which are all part of the Japanese culture. The Japanese politeness factor also associates them with a monochromatic culture because they place importance on the use of appointments and find it essential to apologize when making a cancellation or changing a plan. Japanese is a very reserved culture and is known to be more reserved than other cultures around the world. The Japanese culture emphasizes the need to be soft spoken and polite. In fact, in Japan, the voice you and I in the Western civilization believe is a normal conversational tone is actually quite loud. Because the Japanese people are not emotional people, like mentioned before, they do not believe in confrontation. In Japan, being emotional shows a lack of control. This ties into the Japanese communication style, which is formal high context. The Japanese people communicate with few words and prefer being silent. An example of this is how they bow to greet people. This is why it is important to use the right words when trying to relay a message. They do not mind inferring from body language and facial expressions when communicating with those they feel close to. However, this lack of emotion and speaking with little words can be hard for a foreigner to understand what a Japanese person may be feeling or thinking. It is their reliance on relationships that allows them to communicate in this manner. In conclusion, Japan is a very formal culture that has strong traditions that remain constant throughout the years. The Japanese are very reserved, private people who speak low and avoid uncertainties or confrontation. Due to its high masculinity, women are more housewives and involved in business. So, sorry, ladies. On a side note, for the ladies, don't show off your cleavage because it is highly offensive. Anything below your armpits is too low. That's it, and thank you very much.